Hallo allesamt und willkommen im Death Row History Channel. Ich bin Ihr Gastgeber, Mr. Toad. Und heute sprechen wir über den fallbeil. For those of you that don't know German, that means hello and welcome to the Death Row History Channel. I am your host, Mr. Toad, and today we will be talking about the fallbeil. That is the German guillotine. Not to be confused with the original French guillotine. The Germans did much better. Fallbeil in German, which I'm butchering how to pronounce it, but it means falling axe, which only the Germans could come up with such a gruesome word for a gruesome method. But hey, they adopted the guillotine and they perfected it. The Germans would take pride in perfecting the guillotine so that they could put people to death more effectively. But at the end of the day, the Germans would execute more people with the guillotine than the French would during the French Revolution. The Nazi Party loved the guillotine. That was their number one method. They killed more people with the guillotine, fallbeil, depending on what you call it. They killed more people than the French did, and they killed more people with the guillotine than any other method that they would use during the war. Now, what differentiates the fallbeil from the guillotine? Well, it's simple. This is a fallbeil. This is a guillotine. As you can see, the fallbeil had metal uprights and straps, and the Germans would actually pivot the platform that the condemned was on, so they would stand it up and put the inmate on it, and then lower it. Where the French, it was lowered. They just set them down on it and went. The other thing was the Germans improved the Germans would improve the mechanism of holding the head in place. I've seen they used restraints and stuff like that to hold the head in place. I'm not sure about that. But okay, you're asking yourself, why am I talking about the guillotine? Well, I was watching Death Row Execution's latest video over Helmut Hubner, a 17-year-old young man who was executed by the Nazis for speaking out against the German government, and he was executed by the fallbeil in Hamburg. And it got me to thinking, the guillotine is not that represented today. I mean, it was on the list of methods to use for the New York Death Commission. They went against it and chose the electric chair. But it was on the list. So there had to have been something about it that the Americans liked. While there were a lot more people, like Mr. Hubner, that would be executed with the guillotine, there were also cases like Peter Curtin. For those of you who are not familiar with Mr. Curtin, he was the Vampire of Dusseldorf. He is more famous for his last words than he is anything. The man was just despicable. One of the worst sexual deviants in the history of Germany. The only one I think that would top him would be Armin Meiwes, but by that point, Germany had gotten rid of capital punishment, so it is what it is. But Mr. Curtin his crimes were unspeakable. I won't go into his crimes, but they spanned from 1913 until 1929, and he was a serial killer, a German serial killer. He was arrested in 1930 and was executed in 1931, I believe. Yes, he was executed in July of 1931. But what makes Curtin so memorable is his final words. For those of you with a weak constitution, I apologize. With this topic, there are times where you cannot hide the gruesome nature of some individuals. Curtin's final words were, he turned to a psychiatrist before his head was placed on the guillotine and said, "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." Then, when they actually asked him if he had any last words, Curtin said no. But, yeah. So you can see, Curtin was one twisted duck. That one, the fallbeil carried out its purpose. There was many different, like in America, each different state of Germany, because before the Nazis it was the Weimar Republic, so each individual state had its own individual guillotine, and each guillotine was different. But, you know, like in America, we had, at one point, half the country used the electric chair, and no two electric chairs were the same. Like now, 90% of the states use lethal injection, but no two processes are the same. Whether it's a difference in drugs or what, They are different. And with that, the guillotine has a much more ominous history than what people want to portray. The most interesting part of the guillotine is that one of the most famous executioners of Germany during the Nazi Party was Johann Reichardt. And Reichardt would perform most of the executions under the Nazi Party's reign. Ironically enough, though, Reichardt was not tried at Nuremberg. In fact, Reichardt was one of the executioners at Nuremberg. Apparently, he cut a deal with the Americans and got away scot-free because even though he was a Nazi Party member and he had performed political executions, his job was an executioner, so he could justifiably get by with saying, I was doing my job. So he would execute all of the people found guilty in the American tribunal at the Nuremberg trial. So he was one of the hangmen during that execution spree in Germany after World War II. And after that, he went on to live a normal life, which is kind of bittersweet because you see individuals who justifiably should have been on the gallows just walk away because they're of some asset to whatever country controlled at the time. But that's all I have for you today. This is Mr. Toad with the Death Row History Channel, your one and only source for all things Death Row history, saying, I'm gone.